So these are our panelists. They're very, very interesting. I'm not going to do them the disservice of introducing them and missing out juicy bits of information. So what I would like to suggest is that we do a 2-minute intro each, who you are and what you do, and then I'm going to hit you with a question.
Yeah, hi. My name's John Murphy. I'm the account director for a company called Oban Multilingual. At Oban, we're specialists in multilingual search and conversion and how user behaviour differs from market to market in terms of how people search and how people convert. And my main role at the company is strategising and consulting on global multilingual and conversion campaigns.
Hi, my name's Sarah Wood. I'm co-founder of Unruly. We were founded in 2006. We work with brands to get their content watched, shared, and tracked across the social web.
Hello, my name is Robert Teszka. I am an academic. I do research in cognitive psychology using magic tricks and sometimes consult for companies who do advertising.
Hi, I'm Dawn Smith. I'm VP of Global Solutions for Digitaria. We're a pure-play digital agency in the States, expanding out here, which is what I'm here. We were actually acquired in the WPP network about 2 years ago, and my background is pretty much social strategy, as well as expanding, digital presences to make sure that the campaigns and the paths and behaviors are appropriate for your clients.
So I'm going to start with you, Dawn.
Dear Lord.
So,
all right.
With the recent social media sort of campaign that you were involved in, I'll let you talk about that. What strategies did you use to influence people online?
Okay, show of hands. Who's heard of the Kony Campaign? All right. Anybody familiar with it or haven't heard about it? It's actually an awareness kind of cause campaign that actually started over a path of 10 years. 30,000-foot view, 3 film directors decided to go on break from film school with a camera and went to Uganda, and they ran into the child soldiers and the LRA. They came back, made a film, and we were actually their technology partner from 10 years ago on. So what they did is, over 10 years, they decided to build their social networks, realizing that disenfranchised youth were really the power of getting stuff done within, social causation. So they came up with a long-term plan to really activate, the grassroots campaign, then actually use that information to impact the NGO, the UN, to actually make cause and good and go after the first war criminal, Joseph Kony, who's actually kidnapped over 60,000 people and basically taken child soldiers to rape, murder, pillage, and kill. He's been moved out of Uganda. He's now into the DRC. But he still exists. So one of the things that we did and worked on over the last couple of years was platforms to activate the disenfranchised youth so we can actually get the awareness out there. And then, of course, this past year, they used their unbelievable documentarian and emotional skills to make you feel what's going on and what happens when an entire region is ravaged by hate and ravaged by insanity, is the way that I would say it. So there was a plan last year to kind of make 2012 the year of actually getting him, not stopping him, but getting him and bringing him to the war crime. So they decided to mimic it to the US presidential election. So this whole entire thing was planned to basically activate users at the beginning of the year, activate youth, to basically, they only really wanted 750,000 video views of a 30-minute video. When it was out there, because they had built their schedule over 10 years, they were able to get Rihanna within the first hour. We got Obama in the third. We got Oprah in the actually in the first 30 minutes because she's very tight to them. But we were able to get 110 million views in 4.5 days. We became the actually largest. We just beat Susan Boyle, so I think that was actually on day 3. But it was pretty impressive. But one of the things that we also learned is when you change that kind of influx within a society across the world, they didn't expect to get that. They were expecting it more in the US. You actually have a negative impact as well, because you have people that are so for the idea, but people are so about the one click on social media. It's like, oh, I like it, but I don't know anything about it. But I'm going to tell you that you need to be for it. And then they have the people that are like, oh, wait a minute. You can't take 30 minutes to make a cause that has lasted 30 years. It actually seems like it's trivial. So we actually, with working with them, knew that a social influence, if it actually got out there, it was an awareness strategy. And so whether you're for or you're against it, it was still good because people are aware of the cause out there and they start asking questions. I'm going to move on before these people, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time. But actually, phase 3 of the campaign just launched last night. And it's to activate after the presidential election to have all the students who were part of this process in the US to show up on the White House lawn, to surround it, and basically ask the new president to have a global summit with the head of 10 of the nations. And there's individual campaigns around those nations to get ahead at that on the UN steps as well as the White House to actually talk about this process. So it's interesting in how using social media to really influence change. Sure.
Sorry, can I just pick up on that, Nathalie? I think it's such a powerful example. It's the most incredible campaign to have worked on. And it fits in very nicely with what you were saying about video being the medium that is most effective for being able to build rapport, kind of neuron mirroring and also neuron coupling. I think Kony was a fantastic example of that. It was also kind of a seismic cultural shift happened on that day. That was the moment. It was more than about collectivism becoming cool. That was the moment when I think a whole generation felt they could change the world. We were all very empowered. And then over the following days, you saw the dark side. You saw some of the negative aspects of what could happen when social media gets out of control. But it was a kind of incredible moment. And I can't wait until after the elections. It will eclipse the US elections, I'm sure, and its impact. Let's hope so.
Well, it's all you. Keep going. So how do you influence people online? What strategies do you use?
Okay, so we particularly look at things from a cultural perspective. So it's understanding, okay, if I've got my strategy in the US or in the UK, okay, let's keep it on social. So if it's, say, using a platform like Facebook, it's saying, okay, well, Facebook is very big generally in the West, but actually if I'm in China or if I'm working in Japan, different social media platforms are actually used there, and the way in which people engage with social media is also different, the reason people actually use it. So what we're very much about is just looking into those different touch points online of what drives somebody from a search through to their interaction with a web page, and of course their eventual conversion, and how that diversifies. So if we sort of look at, okay, the touch points as a marketeer, you would say, okay, the first touch point is, how is someone trying to find what I offer? So how are they searching for it on the web? So if you're running an SEO campaign, it might be, okay, well, what keyword should I use? I'll be visible for these keywords. But if you're looking internationally, there might be one way to say something in English, but there could be 4 ways to say it in German. If it's Chinese, it's probably a different term altogether. And there's some great examples of this that we've had over time, and I might come back to one, depends how long I talk for. So keep this going for. The next bit is, so once you've identified how each individual person has found you, it's the copy that you have. So it's your advert, your display advert, or your meta description, and how is that going to get somebody to click on my website? And the reasons that people click and go to buy things and go onto websites is different from different markets. Germans are very different to English people. If you've got an advert and you've copywritten it for a German, it might be in German, but it's not necessarily what's going to make them click. So examples in retail would be, Nathalie had a slide which was saying trust is a really important part of the conversion cycle online. But actually in Scandinavia, they're very used to having to buy from websites where they don't understand the language particularly well. They don't really know if they're going to get their product in a week or 5 weeks. So there's different touch points, such as the quality of the product, the price, the discount, the availability of a brand that they can't find in their own country, which would make them click. And then it's right down through to, when they're on the website, what's the positioning of text and the colours that I'm using, and how does that affect conversion? So one client we were working with quite recently was a sat-nav manufacturer called Mio, and their kind of corporate colour, if you like, is amber or orange. So their click to buy button was orange to fit in with the rest of the website. But actually when we turned that to green, so a sort of amber to go, that uplifted conversions by between 20 and 50% in different markets. But not in every market. Interestingly, in Spain, it actually had a negative impact. And just finally, another example of those differences is, I don't know if you've ever seen a Chinese or a Japanese website, but it's enormously different to websites that we like over here. It's all about getting everything above the fold and in one nice, neat window. If you go onto the BBC News website, there's not a lot of data there. It's just a few images and a few pieces of text. If you go to a website like Sina, which is a massive news portal in China, has more visits than the BBC, it's all on one big long page. You scroll right down to the bottom, there's flashy buttons going on all over the shop. I mean, it looks like a complete mess. But that's how they like to view content. And similarly, if they look to the BBC, they probably think, well, this is a bit naff. I want something more exciting. So, those implications and those differences in how people search and how people interact has huge differences to getting somebody to engage with a piece of content. So that's where we come from.
Rob?
I come from a very different world in which I tend to look at the interaction between people one-on-one. So one of the things that I study in my field is attention and awareness. How do people allocate what they decide to pay attention to, and what does that make them aware of? Or conversely, what does that make them completely unaware of? So you've probably seen the advertising campaign that was based on some research done quite a long time ago now.
Is the volume down?
Is this actually on, or am I just really quiet?
You have to hold it closer. Really close.
I apologize. There was an ad where you watch some basketball players passing a ball back and forth from each other. And you're supposed to count the number of times the ball is passed from the team wearing white to each other. And at the end of the video, it asks you, did you get the right number? And then asks you, did you notice the gorilla? And if you watch it again, a gorilla has walked right into the middle of the frame, stood there in full view for 9 seconds, pounded his chest, and then walked off again. Which is a very powerful demonstration of the fact that you can be looking right at something without noticing it. Now, my own background is actually as a magician. I busked for a year before I went to university, and I decided that this would be a cool thing to bring into academic research, where whenever we're communicating with other people, we're constantly using cues, such as our body language, what we're saying, where our eyes are looking, to give them information about what's important, what they should be paying attention to, and conversely, what they shouldn't notice. And nowhere is that more evident than when you're watching a magician who's doing everything he can, providing all the right cues so that you miss things that can be happening right in full view. So I'm not entirely sure how this can apply directly to social media campaigns, but there's this rule that happens in magic that you try and provide people with the cues that they will then use themselves to tell the story you want them to tell themselves. So all the magic happens in the spectator's head. You give them the information they need to weave the story themselves. So in some senses, if you tell them what you want them to see, or you tell them what you want them to believe, it won't be as effective. There's no more reliable source than the person themselves. So when you want someone to come away with a message, you give them just the little bits of information that they need to put it together themselves and come away with the message you want to say.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that was a hugely successful campaign, the video you just described. I think in 2010 it was TfL, the road transport safety ad, and road safety ads are especially good at doing this well. And I think one of the things that's very effective there is the shock, the surprise, the unexpectedness, that this schema disruption, where you just kind of go, whoa, wasn't expecting that, don't know what that is, and that state of heightened emotional arousal is what we find tends to lead to the sharing of videos. So of course, it depends how you measure your social ROI. It might not be about number of shares, but if you're interested in measuring shareability, word of mouth, then kind of eliciting that state of high emotional arousal and shock is kind of a very well kind of known and tested one, is a great way to do it, and that's a fantastic example.
But I'll go back to what we talked about earlier, which is in the UK, shock awareness works really well. So there was the campaign that came out, which was the Testicular Cancer Touch Yourself campaign. It looks like this gorgeous, if anybody saw that one, gorgeous woman, basically page 3 girl touching herself, and at the end, she's basically pulls her apart her panties, and there's something that shouldn't be there. And it worked really, really well in the UK market because it was about a young adult male audience, and they work with shock value very well. You try to put that in the US, I was actually in the office when it came through, did not go over as well. So you need to understand the audience where you want that to go as well.
We ran a campaign recently for £1 Johnny Club, which was very controversial, quite explicit in the eyes of our US office, but in the eyes of the UK office, we felt it was playful. We also thought it was a good cause. It was a condom subscription service, which showed women having a good time having sex. And we were like, well, what's not to love about this? But the other side of the Atlantic, it did not go down well. I thought this is something that your book covered off really well, the difference in kind of the cultural differences, because it's hard to do that without falling into stereotypes. What was your approach to looking at different geographies? Were you thinking about language, visuals, specific territories? Were there any kind of insights that you came upon along the way?
Yes, I was expecting to ask the questions, not answer them, but no, it's fine.
You know so much about this. There's no point asking us. You know all this.
No, but you've got really interesting experiences in your various fields, which is kind of, you bring this stuff alive. So a lot of the cultural research that I found was directed through a man called Git Hofstede, who is a Dutch psychologist who spent about 40 years, like Cialdini, but discovering how different cultures experience reality, essentially. And he found that there are 6 main dimensions. So these are things like collectivism versus individualism, power distance, masculinity versus femininity. There's a whole bunch. There's 6 in total. And what you find is that people who, from a particular culture, will tend generally to rate higher along certain scales than others. And that's the thing that will govern the way in which we expect to be interacted with online. So when you're talking about the shock value in the US, that's got a much higher power distance than it does here. It's probably a much more masculine society where gender roles are more clearly divided. And so you have to throw that into the mix, and you can start to make predictions about what kind of content people will respond to favorably versus unfavorably based on the cultural dimensions. Yeah, and you can check out his website. It's absolutely brilliant. And if you want to read his book, it's called Culture, the Software of the Mind, I think. Yeah.
So one of the challenges I think that we currently face from an advertising perspective is not only do people behave differently on social than they do maybe in their demographic and offline, but people behave differently on different networks. So what I'm willing to share on Pinterest, what I'm willing to share on Twitter, what I'm willing to share on Facebook may be distinctly different, and the level of trust within each of those networks. So I think it's interesting when we're running social campaigns and you do the user journeys and you're looking at the targets that you're putting towards those and your expectations, you have to take that into consideration. And it really does come back to the baseline of what you're talking about, but I think there's another layer that now has to be brought in, and that's really that social comfort of sharing the information based on the platform it's on.
One thing that I've always speculated about is that at this level, and and now that the internet is so ubiquitous and global, that different communities have their own cultures. So how much of the cultural differences that you find that are geographically based are being supplanted by the different cultures in different social networks? Is that something that you found in your own comparison of different groups, or is that mostly still based in geographical cultures?
So you mean how, excuse me, how people, why people use social media in different markets and what it does for them? Yeah. So, I mean, the best example of this is, if you go to any talk or anything like that in the UK, the digital marketing show, you'll hear nothing. You'll hear just loads about social media. We do social, and we also do search. And in terms of actually driving traffic to websites, I think social in the UK accounts for about 3% of traffic that's actually driven to the end website. It might be a bit more than that now, but. It certainly, it shows that social is a different thing to search, and people use it differently, and on different platforms. But over in Asia, in China, 14% of traffic that is driven to websites is driven from social media platforms. And that's very much just due to the way that they search, which is much more about looking for people's opinions, looking for sort of guidance on what people have said about a particular company. So if I live in Brighton, if I'm looking for a plumber, I type into Google plumbers Brighton, I'll go top 1 to 5, and that's how I'll find out who's going to come around and fix my toilet. But if I was say in China, what I might do is go to the equivalent of, say, the BBC website and search for Brighton plumber and read what news stories have been said about companies in my area, any horror stories, any really good customer service stories. So that can be then quite significant in terms of how you can make social media work for you and managing where your content is placed, and particularly for any kind of campaigns that are looking at social media in China, there are sort of several quite large platforms where, just like you would with your SEO, look at what your meta descriptions are saying, what your visible content is for people in those markets. You'd be saying, well, what's my what someone said about me on this particular website, or what news coverage do I have there? So it does differ, and that can have quite big implications.
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? Do social networking etiquettes supplant geographical etiquettes? I haven't done any research on this, but kind of anecdotally thinking through lots of the campaigns that we've run, my feeling would be that is happening. If you think about, So Twitter, zero tolerance approach towards trolls. It's one of the things I really like about Twitter, and you mentioned this in your book. I think it's kind of strong in comparison with YouTube. Playground for trolls. The kind of behaviour and comments that are tolerated and enjoyed on YouTube are very different from the ones on Twitter. And then Facebook kind of sits somewhere in between. It's an anxious mother at times. That's because all our mums are stalking us and I'm stalking my kids. But then at other times, the gossips are there as well. So I think that this would be a great area to be researching.
Also anecdotally, for a recent campaign that I consulted for, the creative director of this marketing campaign for a TV show wanted, because the client wanted to specifically target Reddit, and he wanted some way of getting the people on Reddit to spread this particular marketing campaign like crazy. And well, Reddit doesn't really have social sharing in the same way as Facebook or even G+. But you can, I guess, put a little Reddit logo and say, click to share this on Reddit. But Reddit has this very strong culture of hating reposts, downvote reposts to hell. So how do you get a social network that doesn't like the same thing to be rehashed to share it repeatedly? It's an interesting question that sort of doesn't really exist in the physical space as far as I know. So I guess more research needs to be done.
But I also think we also have to realize social networks are not just part of marketing campaigns, right? So the eye of a brand is in the eye of the beholder. So I'll use an example. I got a free Samsung TV. It died a day outside of warranty, and I was pissed. Went Twitter. I lit Samsung sales up. I lit Samsung CEO, and then I put the service center. I got a response in 2 hours, and I got a free TV. Why? It's because, and it was a 55-inch. It was gorgeous. But I think what you need to realize is, as much as we talk about marketing, there's other parts of communication, from call center to POS to all that information, that the channel itself has a different persona based on what you're trying that user to do. And as much as we try to get into what we're trying to communicate from an advertising perspective, it is as important to understand how your users will use that for what type of communication, and take a step back from just the marketing.
Okay. I have another question. I want to ask each of you a tip that you have for influencing people on a particular platform or medium.
Do you want me to start? It's like pass the parcel. Just stopped at the wrong moment. We use lots of different platforms depending on the audience, obviously. I would say blogosphere is great if you want kind of in-depth, kind of thoughtful responses, analysis. So often if we're looking kind of for words, and it's more kind of a textual response that we're looking for, blogosphere. Obviously Pinterest, images. For sharing, well, if it's early discovery, Twitter. So I think Twitter is kind of the de facto, the first place that people will go to. The early adopters will be sharing content if they want to be first to share. And then Facebook tends to follow a couple of hours afterwards. But yeah, Pinterest, great works well for our female campaigns, but LinkedIn I think is totally underrated. And lots of the B2B campaigns we work on, and myself personally, I spend most of my time reading what people say on LinkedIn, because that's where my groups are. So my professional networks that I spend a lot of time with in the evenings and the weekends, we're on LinkedIn talking to each other, organising events, and then sharing content as well.
I guess really the only thing that I think about when trying to get people to talk about something online is make it engaging. I mean, people talk about stuff that's good. I think it was Seth Godin who said that ultimately everything boils down to make something good, tell people about it, and repeat. So the first part is the most important. Make something good. If you make something engaging, if it captures people's imagination, if they want to talk about it, they will. So, you dress it up as much as you want. Ultimately, it has to be good.
Yeah, I'm just echoing those two things. I mean, yeah, as well with LinkedIn, we would also say, if you're working in Europe, your equivalent would be VADO, which we're finding has different sort of advertising options to LinkedIn and so forth, and actually seems to get, LinkedIn works really well as well for the UK, but seems to get sort of some good engagement. Yeah, I mean, and as well on the social media side of things, on the something that's interesting side of things. So we've had a client recently working for about 3 years, never done any social media before. Somebody in their US office said that they had to do social media, so now the company wants to throw a load of budget at it. They said, okay, what's the ROI we can get out of this? The company does laptop locks. I mean, like, who wants to friend a laptop lock? So it was sort of an education process with them, and actually, funnily enough, we've gone down more the customer service kind of route and using it as that way of sort of communicating with their clients. So it depends on what you're selling as well. From going back to sort of the original question about advice on platforms, there's such a wide range of kind of international platforms, many of which probably wouldn't necessarily have heard of much about, so I won't go too much interest there, but I think it's maybe taking something a bit more technical and looking at search engines. It's just search is part of your strategy. Just be aware that not everybody uses Google in every single market. In Russia, Yandex is the biggest search engine. In China, it's Baidu. In Korea, it's Naver. The user behaviors on those search engines are different. So in terms of how people find content, so Naver presents content based on category groups as opposed to just a list, and really the piece of advice I give for working on those engines is just they're about sort of 3 or 4 years behind Google in terms of their technical capability. So anything that was important for Google 3 or 4 years ago, like keyword stuffing, is particularly prevalent on those platforms. That's a bit technical, but
so I'll talk about something Facebook just put out about a week ago. They changed the EdgeRank kind of algorithm, just like Google changes its SEO algorithm. And in the process, you may think you have 1 million fans. 18% of your fans are going to see your posts on their timeline. People don't realize that. What's happening is Facebook is for the consumer, not the advertiser. And that means if you do not talk in the language, as an example, I have a nephew. I decided to sign up to get nappies, a discount on nappies for my sister-in-law. But I don't ever talk about kids. I'm not a mom. I'm not part of other groups. I'm a digital media geek. I play World of Warcraft. They're going to downgrade, and I'm not going to see the nappy post, even though you feel that you've gotten that in yours. So I think the lesson learned with regards to how you present in that specific mechanism is it has to be targeted to your user. It's no longer the shout and broadcast. It has to be a personal conversation. So if you all do a lot of Facebook work, start looking at your reach metrics, all of that, your numbers of actually what's being seen, because as of 2 weeks ago, they've kind of dropped, in some cases 7%. The other personal thing is, biggest pet peeve of mine on social is the whine, the sigh. And I think that translates into where everybody is actually asking for attention. In a way, I think that translates on the opposite side to business, which is the PR, which is they write one press release and they think that they can actually link it with the same title across all networks. I think Virgin does a really good job of taking the same press release and actually adding a different voice for each network or each channel. So I think it's something to consider as well.
Thank you. So shall we move to questions from the floor? Does anyone have any questions for any of our spectacular panellists up here?
Hi, really interesting stuff. Does anybody use any kind of psychological typing, like MBTI or any of those kinds of techniques to do the kinds of things that you're talking about here?
Definitely not the MBTI. If you want a proper psychological profiling psychometric test, use the big factor 5 model, which is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. It is the only test that's been standardized and universally accepted as a psychometric test that has any kind of validity whatsoever. The Myers-Briggs is super easy to fake. You take it 30 days later, you're a completely different type. Don't even breathe the word MBTI in this room. Go and find the big 5 personality traits and use that instead. Or Helen Fisher's stuff.
I should also note that even the big 5 has problems with predicting stuff way down the line. So if you want to know what someone's going to do the next day, maybe the big 5 will help you in very specific set of circumstances. But for anything long term or anything aggregated over a lot of people, even the big 5 is not useful for predicting behavior. So be very, very skeptical of anything that has any sort of personality typing.
There you have it.
I'm a little bit apprehensive now about saying anything. At the moment, we're developing a kind of predictive algorithm at Unruly, seeing if it's possible, this holy grail of being able to predict the content that people will share. And we're looking at lots of different ways of testing it. And self-reporting, we found, doesn't really work. People say one thing, do another thing. So we're exploring biometric testing. We're looking at measuring sweat rates, heart rates, facial recognition. There's so many tools out there. We're really enjoying the phase we're in at the moment, which is experimenting with it all and see what gives us the best results. At the end, I think there'll be some kind of mathematical regression analysis that will help us to decide.
Okay. Just because it was mentioned before that people can behave differently on different platforms. And what I'm going to ask is not going to apply to all countries, but particularly working with Russia. We mentioned that people behave on the platforms that require to have your picture and professional profile. They're really nice and professional and fluffy and everything. Whereas on some other websites where you're not required to have your name and picture and everything, they become really nasty people. So, and we're not talking about that on the Facebook when you're talking with your friends, you may allow yourself loose, I don't know, words and phrases. We're talking about completely different personality. Now, to target these people, do we have to approach them in two different ways on the two different platforms, or we have to figure out which ego is more important and how to figure out to influence those people?
I think the way that I take it is you need to take the user journey of what you want them to do. So if you're going after the angry, I don't care, I don't want my name on it person, then you're probably going to go after that channel and target them there. Or if you find out that that's one of their personas, but they're also on Classmates, which is pretty large in Russia, where you do have your, your schooling, your people, your groups, then it's actually going after what part of their personality that you want them to converse with. So I think you actually need to understand what the goal of that communication is, and then do the strategy of where they exist within that framework. I don't know, correct me if you guys think differently.
You have literal communication and inferred meaning depending on which different culture and countries that you're speaking to. These models that we've learnt, coming through sort of offline communications, digital communications, how has that translated into the social media space? Have you found any anomalies, or have you progressed this idea of, for example, Northern Europe's very literal, Southern Europe's very much inferred, and then you've got different other countries. How is that actually panning out with your experience utilising social media on campaigns such as those?
I think from it's sort of going back to what I was saying earlier, really, about why people use social media in different markets and the and what they're using it for. So yeah, just very much back to that. Some of it could be about creating a community, being up to date with products that a company's coming out with and so forth, and others it could be used just to sort of find information and verify that something is okay and that you can trust it and it's a trustworthy source. And yeah, it tends to be that we've seen from our side in sort of East Asia, it's much more the information searching, the trust factor. So if you're not visible on certain platforms, it can have quite a negative impact. People expect you to be somewhere. We've looked at that within the education sector. There's some sort of quite big educational sites out there, and the lack of a UK university's visibility on a particular blog. There's one forum called Turtle out there, which is quite popular. People will always go on there to see what people have said about their experiences in the UK. So, and I guess that might be different in other markets, but that's probably all I could comment on that.
I remember the first time we did anything Unruly with Social Media Week. It was about 18 months ago, and the session we ran was, is there such a thing as a global water cooler? To what extent do conversations travel across languages and across geographical boundaries? And what we found, just chatting, so nothing scientific, nothing with kind of rigorous marketing behind it, but was that video is one of those, is a media that can transcend in lots of ways the different cultural boundaries, partly because it doesn't need to have any language, and audio-visual cues do travel very well. But then it was difficult kind of reconciling that with the way we run our own campaigns at Unruly, where it's very, very targeted, very specific to geography, to demographic, to platform, more like the 1-1 approach, just really kind of narrowing down and personalising every communication as much as you can, which you see some brands doing incredibly effectively when it comes to customer loyalty, and as you were talking about earlier, Dawn, kind of responding to people on Twitter 1-1.
I'd say some of the complexity that comes in when you're dealing with global brands in this nature is also, I work with a large client in the pharmaceutical industry, but 20 products are available in the UK, only 3 are in Ireland, right? So if I try to use one platform to have a communication, even within the UK, I'm actually restricted by government to what I can say and what I can show. So it adds a lot of complexity if I want to build an application or a promotion, and not understanding how you want to go ahead and segment that. It actually adds a lot of time and planning effort. Example as well is you can have global companies that actually have centralized models of marketing budgets, and you have global companies that are decentralized. Well, global companies that are decentralized come up with the ideas, but really the markets can control everything, and they can execute that brand across any network the way they want. If it's global centralized, then you have a little bit more control, but that's really the challenge of today's brands, is how do you use social media, go into those users and communicate, but then also show a disparity of products that may be unique, have different names. As an example, I can have, the actual same product, but it's got a different spelling name. There's a couple of them within the States and here as well. So, and that's just within the same language. So, and that impacts search, that impacts how you would do page media, as well as keywords and targeting.
I think it depends on the objective, doesn't it? Because if search is your objective, yes. If awareness, global awareness, creating a viral cascade is your objective, then you might kind of approach campaign in a different way. So P&G, Best Mom ad, I don't know how many people have seen it, but it was a very kind of moving video about mums bringing up their kids, taking them through to the Olympics. And there were multiple versions of this video distributed across all the different territories. And collect them all together, and it was great. It was the most successful ad of the Olympics in terms of its shareability. 64% of all advertising shares around the Olympics came from this one ad. But despite that fact, it had a really high share to view ratio of 1 in 5. So 1 in 5 people who viewed that ad went on to share it, which is incredibly high. It didn't actually overtake Kony 2012. It didn't overtake Evian Roller Babies. There were lots of videos that it could have overtaken, but it didn't manage to generate that viral cascade because it was dissipated. There were multiple copies of the video, and there wasn't kind of one global coming together around a coalescence around one instance that got everyone talking. So I think it does depend on objective and outcome.
Yeah, I suppose I could just say that on pick up on a point that was mentioned about whether you have your marketing centralised or whether you do farm it out to different countries. I mean, the way that we're set up, for example, is that we've got teams in about 30 different markets, trying to say that actually you've got to get a German running your German campaign. You've got to get them feeding in what content you're producing and so forth, because someone in English isn't going to tell you what a German's going to want to read. But at the same time, there is a need to sort of centralise certain aspects of activity, because you have the sort of too many cooks spoiling the broth scenario and so many different ideas going on. And then also there's the sort of understanding within local markets of how it is best to use your online your digital marketing strategies. So the use of and the application of search, the use and application of social media. So it's argued that you could argue that the UK and the US are probably the furthest forward, most thinking markets in terms of our knowledge about latest Google algorithm and best practice in these verticals. But perhaps your offices overseas aren't quite as up to date on that. So it's learning to pick out the right pieces of information from them that give you that local those local insights, and you can take those nuances into account with your campaigns. But also having an overall strategy which is benefiting you as a company, is using best practice.
So far this evening, we talked about targeting audiences by demographics, geography, and so on. But when I think of content such as Charlie's Bit My Finger and Kony, I just wonder, is there anything you do that unites us rather than divides us when you're putting out content globally?
Heartfelt emotion on something that is an atrocity that pretty much everybody can agree on, number one. And number two, people like picture porn. So you go to any brand, any website, really, really good imagery is really, it's quick, it's easy, it's good to talk about. People like to retweet it. It's the easiest, cheapest way you do content, but it does require a strategy. So.
Yeah, there's a whole field in psychology called cross-cultural psychology, which basically tests everything you can think of to see whether people from different cultures respond to it differently or whether everyone responds to it in exactly the same way. And there's a whole wealth of literature available to anyone who wants to look to find out, hey, look, everyone on the planet thinks about this in exactly the same way. And that's the kind of stuff that you can use to reach a global audience.
Can you give us a author title? that sounds really interesting.
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, later I'm going to novel you.
it's been brilliant, and I've learnt so much in the last kind of hour or so. And there's been no mention of peer index, cred, or clout, which I think we should give a cheer for. But my question is, we've been discussing a lot about influence, but how do you respond to the word manipulation?
It's a really good question, and I think there is a fine line, and I think the key to this is authenticity. I don't know if everyone will remember the kind of the fiasco around the oil spill last year, when there was the fake Twitter account that was set up by someone called, the handle was at, I think it was BP Global PR, and it was someone who was claiming to be BP's Global PR spokesperson, and he was talking about putting out crazy kind of statements saying, oh yeah, well at BP we really care about safety, and then, well actually we care about profits first and then safety. And he had lots more followers, he had 10 times more followers than the actual kind of official channels, and he put out a statement which I thought was really telling and very insightful. And he said, people ask, how do you get people to respect your brand? Have a respectable brand. And I think that's the key for brands who want to engage people. It needs to be authentic, be yourself, everyone else is taken. Oscar Wilde. The oldies are always the best.
So I'll take that just from a Kony perspective, because as you change the lexicon of the world, there's going to half of the population is going to actually rebound in your face. And it does happen. And in fact, there was some negative influence, which is people are saying, how are you using the money? What is this? What are your incentives behind it? And I think transparency, in light of having that come up, knowing that it's going to happen when you reach a certain, I guess you could say, scale and center of gravity around your campaigns, and then just having a plan in place of how to address it. And not just yourself, but that entire campaign was about social influencers of their grassroots. And so they actually had prepared, ready to go, the grassroots activists within each of the states, within each of the countries, that were then going to actually respond to each one of those tweets, to each one of those posts, to each one of those blogs.
Among magicians, manipulation is not such a dirty word. But the basic idea is to do what you need to do to get people to see the story. So if you have a message you want to give to people, you do what you need to do so that they see it, and you try to minimize the negative effects that whatever method you're using will have. So you can see this in a lot of heavy-handed virals, where people will reject them because they say, oh, this is just advertising. I don't want to be advertised to. So you need a light touch. You do just the bare minimum to nudge people in the right direction, and they'll go the rest of the way on their own. So it's not manipulation. It's more an idea of a gentle push.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking to sort of try and help someone engage more with your website, and if you're looking at search, it's about a lot of what's going to get that click through is making sure that people get the content that they want to see very, very quickly, and it's very, very visible to them. So going back to what we were talking about in terms of the trust factors that make people want to buy from a website, I suppose in some ways you could look at it, yes, you're manipulating people because you're making sure that they've got absolutely no worries whatsoever, but you're only the way you do that, and the way we say you do that, going back to the Scandinavian example, is to make sure that your delivery information is really, really clear and really prominent, that hits them early. So actually, by following the process, you're touching on the points that the user is concerned about, and giving them that information. So in that respect, it works quite well.
So I kind of want to make a play for complexity here and say, I think the desire from the marketing background is to make psychology something that isn't as complex as it is, in a sense, in that we keep being sort of overwhelmed by the absolute system one, I guess, if you want to think the Kahneman. Maybe MBTI isn't high in validity because you don't get it the same over 30 days or 2 years, but maybe it's quite valid for the way in which people see themselves in different situations and operate from different personae and that kind of stuff. So I guess what I want to throw back to you is how do we manage the reality of the fact that people are going to be tremendously complex and throw up all sorts of crazy stuff that we're not expecting, while at the same time trying to understand them and make them into something understandable. And maybe this is one of the reasons why Facebook is having such a difficult time monetizing itself, because people continually to kind of surprise them about how they intend to use it and how they respond to what's coming at them?
I think that's a really, really good question. And I think often with these events and with the book, people expect silver bullet answers. You think, okay, well, I'm going to come to this talk, I'm going to figure out exactly how we work, and it's going to work. And I can just fire it and I'll hit the bullseye. That just doesn't happen in real life. I mean, there are certain things that you can say, well, yes, as humans, we'll respond to opportunities for food and sex because if we don't, we'll die. There's a subset of humans for whom that isn't the case. So even the most basic of needs, if that's not applicable to every single human on Earth, then we've got a problem about the way that we're investigating our research in how people interact with one another. That was kind of the idea with the book, in which there are many caveats, was just to highlight how many factors we are subject to when we're dealing with online platforms, never mind in real life. I think a lot of it is to do with educating ourselves and others that it's just too big of a world to reduce it down to a series of principles and rules, and that context, personal experience, predispositions all have an input into how we behave now, in the future, in 10 years' time, etc.
So I think one of the opportunities of social media is being able to talk to people one-on-one and build relationships long-term. But that requires a tremendous amount of investment and resources. And as individuals, most of us don't have the personal resources to be able to do that. I struggle on Twitter to talk to people meaningfully because I'm too busy looking after kids or working, as we all are, kind of living our everyday lives, and brands have just those same struggles when they're talking to people. I think there's a structural problem as well, which is with lots of campaigns, they're very much, they're campaign-based. The very fact they are campaigns, they have a shelf life. They're for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks to coincide with a Christmas season or a summer sale or the Super Bowl. And it's very difficult. Relationships aren't forged over a week or over a weekend. They're forged over much longer periods of time. So social media does give an opportunity to do that, but it's going to be it's a long-term investment, and I guess we'll see some brands making that and others not prepared to do so.
There's always the caveat in anything involving a lot of people. When you aggregate over all of them, the hidden caveat is all else being equal, and it isn't. Nothing is ever always all else being equal. There's so much individual variation that it's not the sense that this principle always works. It's this principle gives you an edge in a certain situation sometimes. But there are certain aspects of at least online communication that allow you to develop these one-on-one relationships, and not just develop them, but specifically set out to end up with a relationship with individual people in the world, and use that and take advantage of it or use it for your own personal gain. So in a lot of transmedia campaigns, you give people multiple modes of entry. So some people want to interact with characters in some transmedia campaign via Twitter. Some people want to follow them on Facebook. Some people want to email them. Some people want to actually phone them. Some people want to passively follow their blog. So you can design things knowing that there is going to be a lot of individual variation in how people want to engage, and give them every opportunity to do so. People want to do things differently. They can. So it's not that, it's verboten in anything on the internet that it has to be broadcast to lots of people, and you have to think of rules as being aggregated across a lot of people. You can design around individual interactions.
What was I going to say? Sorry. I think we also have to remember from a social network perspective that I just completely lost it. Never mind.
Surely that means it's time for drinks.
I'd like to thank our panel very much for being here, for having some fantastic insights and debate and conversation. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for turning up. Thanks, Sam.
I was going to say one other thank you. A massive thank you to Sarah and her team for hosting us in the fabulous Unruly loft. And most importantly, thanks to all the panel. And they'll be around for a little while now. Thanks again for coming. Cheers, everyone.